Welcome to Leading by Example, upholding standards without compromise. I am your host, Dr. Vaughn, inspiring excellence, one lesson at a time. Are you ready to be better within your world and become the standard bearer within your organization or wherever you are? Leaders, aspirants, every one of you, all of us influence our culture, the organization's culture, our workplace's culture through actions taken both inside and outside of the workplace. I founded Ontero Solutions upon integrity, customer satisfaction, and attention to detail, specifically executive coaching and leadership development. Join in for fun, practical, and educational stories as I share lessons, both the good and the bad, that I have learned in my 20 years of leadership and management experience. Leading by example starts now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our radio show, where we explore real issues that challenge our standards, inspire change, and help us lead by example in a world that sometimes forgets what matters. I'm your host, Dr. Vaughn, and I'm thrilled to have you join me as we explore these important topics together. Have you ever wondered why our values are often compromised, whether in our workplaces, politics, or personal lives? Why do we sometimes see principles being pushed aside for quick wins or convenience? We are tackling these questions on this show, Leading by Example, upholding standards without compromise. Throughout our series, we'll dig deep into the tough issues, offering insights, answers, and most importantly, solutions. So are you ready to explore how we can all lead by example? If so, let's get started. So today, we're continuing our series titled Empathy and Enforcement, Balancing Firmness with Understanding. In our first episode, we examined the importance of empathy in leadership, particularly in roles that require enforcing rules and regulations. We defined empathy as applied to leadership and what it means to be an empathetic leader. We discussed how empathy influences leadership effectiveness and contributes to a more cohesive, motivated team environment. And lastly, we discussed strategies for leaders to practice that allow them to remain authoritative while being approachable and understanding. So the title of the second episode, this one in this series, is Empathy in High Stress Situations. This episode explores how leaders can apply empathy in high pressure or crisis situations while making tough decisions. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Terrence Sanders, an expert in leadership psychology and organizational resilience. Don't look shocked. This episode addresses a critical question. How can leaders apply empathy in high pressure or crisis situations while making tough, timely decisions? Stress and crisis often push empathy to the back burner, but empathy can be the difference between failure and growth in these moments. Today, we'll explore strategies for maintaining composure, case studies of empathetic leaders in action, and practical techniques for developing empathy as a skill. Dr. Sanders, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Vaughn. It is a pleasure to be here. This topic is so important because it's not just about managing crises. It's about leading through them to inspire trust and fostering long-term success. I'm excited to share my thoughts, my insights, and real-world experiences with your audience.
Awesome. All right. So with that, we're going to jump right in, okay?
Sounds good.
So Dr. Sanders, let's start by defining the challenge. In your experience, why is empathy so crucial in high stress situations? And, you've been there, served in the military, as enlisted and as officer, deployed to combat, now transitioned, to a civil servant position. You know all about high stress. Why is empathy so crucial during high stress situations?
That is a very good question. I do thank you for understanding the background that I've experienced throughout my life cycle. Empathy is critical because it ensures leaders don't lose sight of the human element, especially during crisis. Crisis can cloud judgment, and I've seen that throughout my military career and in the civil or civilian sectors. But empathy helps leaders stay in tune, stay connected to their teams. It communicates effectively when a leader shows empathy, because there's a difference between empathy and sympathy.
Mm-hmm.
Empathy is when you get down to that individual's level and understand exactly what they are dealing with. When you talk about sympathy, you're basically feeling sorry. You're not down there with them. So when you make both an efficient but an ethical decision, it helps to sustain the team, knowing that you are more empathetic in your decision making.
Mm-hmm. Very well said. I like that. So let's start, Dr. Sanders, by setting the stage. Stressful situations, whether workplace crises, public emergencies, or even personal challenges, right, have a way of testing us as leaders. Let's discuss why stress is a critical factor in leadership and how it can impact our ability to lead with empathy. Okay.
That sounds good. That's a great starting point, especially when you're under stress.
Mm-hmm.
In our brains, when we think about stress, it's like a fight or flight response. Understanding that there's a situation that we don't want to be involved in, but we know as a leader, we have to take charge. And this is an automatic survival technique and mechanism that shifts our focus to an immediate threat when we feel it. And what's useful in a life or death situation, and I've experienced that with my 2 tours in Iraq, it helped me to understand that I have a responsibility not only to leading myself, but I have to be able to lead my team in order for them to survive and return home. So it reduces our ability to process information when we're in stressful situation, regulate our reactions, and consider others' perspective.
Mm-hmm.
These are all key components of empathy. There have been
Mm-hmm.
times when I would complete a task over time, working myself so hard to make sure everything is done. However, I had to learn how to delegate and to supervise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you know what else? So what you're saying, Dr. Sanders, is that basically, stress hijacks our emotional intelligence, you know,
Yes,
and it makes it hard to connect with others when you most need to.
absolutely.
So, what I've learned, throughout my time in the military is, you want to kind of, put good practices, into, kind of make it baked into, your style as a leader. So that way, when you have these high stress situations arise, you're operating off of like muscle memory, if you will.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes habit forming.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Exactly. So, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. So, this presents an interesting challenge for leaders in high pressure situations, balancing the need to make firm and quick decisions with demonstrating compassion. So, Dr. Sanders, how can leaders navigate this dual challenge?
It it's not easy, but it's possible. First, leaders need to recognize when stress consciously influence their decision. This awareness create a moment to pause and reflect and show empathy. Let me give you a real world example. Uh, uh, I was a team leader for a very important project, and I had to change the direction of the program that I was in charge of. So I faced a missed deadline for the project from one of my team members. This missed deadline put pressure on me as a team leader to complete the project on time. Despite the deadline being missed, the member of my team failed to inform me and failed to deliver the work, causing stress and jeopardizing my leadership to those that I was responsible. So I was losing trust from them to accomplish this project. So I had to call that team member to discuss the situation. I had to balance firmness with understanding. I had to make a decision on how to approach it. So I had to take a deep breath and understand that, yes, I'm frustrated, but I have to comport myself by emphasizing the importance of the deadlines and the need to communicate in the future.
Mm-hmm.
The team member kind of reported, he was dealing with some personal problems and it spilled over to delaying his assignment, but he understood and agreed to better manage his workload and seek support from other team members. However, it was my responsibility to make sure that the project was going along the time frame that the leaders had entrusted me. So I had to reinforce accountability. And by
Mm-hmm.
reinforcing accountability, I required that team member to create a checklist and milestones and submit them weekly to help him to stay focused, to check in with me, to see his progress, and to keep me updated. And I wanted him to know that I care about his situation, but I wanted him to know that it was important for him to approach this project with the seriousness that all of the other team was approaching this project. So this helped build great trust and accountability. It fostered a culture of trust with him, and it's was a good support in the workplace. So in this high stakes situation, I had to be firm, but doing so with compassion, understanding that he was dealing with some personal problem, which makes a significant difference to people that are in your charge. Instead of focusing solely on the missed deadline, I also consider how it affects others and how to better communicate that with him.
That is very well said, Dr. Sanders. And as you know, and have experienced, that's easier said than done sometimes, because
Absolutely.
at the end of the day, even though you're a human, you're still a leader and you have to display empathy. So, that human response is, you know what I mean? Like, how dare, you know what I mean? That first
Right.
instance is let me think about how I can, you know what I mean? That usually
Absolutely.
comes after you've like you said, you pause and reflected, on the
Correct.
situation and, let me figure out what's going on. And that's what we have to do as leaders, because we can, we're humans too. We can get caught up,
Absolutely.
in the activity of things. So Dr. Sanders, again, very well said. I believe there's a common misperception or a common perception that empathy is viewed as a weakness. What you said was great. So I believe that there's a common perception that, empathy is viewed as a weakness. So in that situation, if I viewed empathy as a weakness, I'd be like, oh, Dr. Sanders, he's soft. He just let people roll all over him. All he gonna do is, sit here and, come behind you and clean up. That's Mr. Cleanup Man. So why do you think that is?
Well, sadly, it is misunderstood for
Mm-hmm.
leadership. And in a fast-paced, authoritative setting, it could be perceived as being hesitant or perceived as being weak. But the
Mm-hmm.
reality is that being empathetic and being firm are not mutually exclusive. Rather,
Mm-hmm.
they enhance one another.
Mm-hmm.
When leaders combine empathy with decisiveness, they don't just make better decisions, they gain the trust and the loyalty of their team. People rally behind leaders who show they care even when the decisions are tough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or unpopular, right?
Absolutely.
That's a powerful perspective. So instead of undermining a leader's authority, empathy enhances a leader's
Absolutely.
credibility by showing that they are both decisive and human.
Absolutely. Empathy isn't a weakness, it's a strength that allows leaders to connect, inspire, and make informed decisions, considering both immediate and long-term impacts.
Wow. Wow. So we've been exploring how stress affects leadership and empathy. Now we will shift our focus to actionable strategies. This is the good part for maintaining composure and empathy
Mm.
during a crisis. Woo, that's the hard part. So, Dr. Sanders, let's start with one of the most basic but often overlooked strategies, pausing to assess. Why is this so critical during high stress situations?
Yes. Well, pausing and assessing is one of a leader's most powerful tools. In a
Hmm.
crisis situation, when it arises, it is important for both the leader and the team to understand who's in charge and that the leader has the responsibility of guiding at times firmly, but decisively in areas that will get things done. When
Hmm.
leaders react immediately without processing what's happening, they really risk making decisions driven by fear. I have to make it to the next level if I don't get this done. And they get frustrated. They can take the frustration out on the members of the team and they can take it home, or it just can cause confusion. Leaders have to build emotional management, control, objectivity, and consideration of others, especially their feelings, into their responses, planning when it is appropriate to pause, and assess.
Mhm.
Before taking any kind of action, it is important just to kind of take a pause. Responding is like, pressing the reset button and holding it for a specific duration. You kind of have
Mhm.
to hold it for a specific duration. When you reset your phone or reset your modem, you have to hold it so
Mhm.
it will cycle through. So that's what you have to do when you are faced with a very stressful situation. You have to pause and assess to allow your mind to regulate the best response or no response.
Mhm. Mhm. So that makes a lot of sense. Do you have an example of how a leader might apply this in real time?
Yes, I can imagine a team facing a sudden, unexpected deadline, like I just illustrated. We react so swiftly as leaders, and we demand sometimes if we are not meeting the project in the timeline that leadership is requesting, then we will demand, hey, you need to stay after work to get this done, demanding overtime for that team without
Mm.
considering the long-term implication, families, out
Daycare.
considering the
Mhm.
implication of someone might get sick and then that person have to fill in the gap for the person that is sick or for morale or productivity. However, a leader must take a moment to pause and assess to see and use this time to step back, clarify the situation, ask these fundamental questions. What resources do we have? What's the best way to approach this? And how do I communicate this to my team emphatically? And then ask them for their input to meet this unexpected deadline. Buy-in to me is the most important thing. It leads to increased motivation, productivity, and engagement.
Mhm.
They become part of the solution when you have buy-in from the team.
Mhm.
And with this buy-in, it leads to better performance and results for the company, which goes to say, one of my favorite saying is, the seed that you plant is the seed that will grow. And so with cooperation, when you pause and assess and you react effectively by allowing individuals to provide you with their input, it would allow you to create a more cohesive team because you're building that trust.
I like that quote. You said the seed that you plant is the seed that you grow.
Yes,
I love that. I love
thank
that.
you.
And I think there's another spin on that too that I've heard before. Something like, if you sow patience, you'll reap
Reap,
patience.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. So Dr. Sanders, this brings us to another critical strategy, and that's empathetic communication. How
Mm,
can leaders use empathetic communication, to maintain trust and calm during crises?
that's that can be very challenging, especially for leader because you're
But equally
asking
good at
them
the
to
same
be
time sometimes.
transparent.
Right.
You're
Right.
asking them for clarity. And that is essential. Empathetic communication isn't about sugarcoating problems or avoiding tough conversation. It's about acknowledging your team's stress and challenges while providing direction and reassurance. For example, a leader might say, I don't know, this is a difficult situation, and I want to acknowledge its impact on everyone. Here's what we know so far, what we're doing about it, and how I like your input moving forward. That is the best way to be transparent and to be clear on the challenges that is going to help the team complete whatever project you have been assigned.
Mm-hmm. I like that because it's very the communication of that leader is very thoughtful, you know, and the messaging and the methodology for getting after, or getting to that solution,
Right.
involves everyone. I like that. It's about addressing the emotional undercurrents without creating unnecessary panic. So like you said, we don't know all the details so far. I like that verse saying, and you've been there, in combat, especially, the fog of war is a real thing. So
Absolutely.
you got your soldiers and you're like, I don't know what just happened, and I don't know. We might have to, So what I need you to, so that kind of thing. So what are some common mistakes that leaders make when communicating? during crises? What are some of the things that we can do to make sure that we don't create unnecessary panic?
The most common thing that I've noticed leaders do and employees do is avoiding communication. In the scenario I spoke about earlier, the team member was having personal problems, but
Mhm.
he didn't come to me as a team leader to say, listen, I am having some personal problems. I might need some assistance in getting some of this project done, whether it's a design or whether it's a strategy. When we look at avoiding communication altogether, it overwhelms the team and it doesn't allow the communication to flow effectively. And sometimes we can overwhelm our team with too much information. Without communication, people will fill in gaps. They
Mhm.
will be creative,
Mhm.
which could be very problematic. Conversely, providing too many details can lead to confusion. You have to be able to strike the balance. You have to be clear. You have to be concise. You have to be precise and empathetic. Those things are essential.
Mhm. Wow, that's a lot. That's great advice. Yeah, that's awesome. So Dr. Sanders, let's shift to another important aspect, delegation and trust. Why is this such a critical strategy for leaders during crisis?
Because their name is on the project. You
Hmm.
may have a name and a title of a project, but Dr. Sanders' name, my name, is actually on that project. So delegation is critical because no leader can or should handle everything alone. Too many times, leaders take on too much responsibility. It is the leader is under high pressure. They have the inability to trust their team members, to
Hmm.
share responsibility, and is not allowing them to reduce stress, is not allowing them to empower their team members and foster a sense of shared ownership. And this
Hmm.
starts because a crisis has occurred. You know that each of your team member possess some type of talent.
Hmm.
Some may be administrative, some may be organization, some may be execution. By understanding everybody's role and everybody's talent, you're building a relationship and you're understanding your team's strength. But when you're in a pressure situation, you sometimes lose the ability to confide in members of your team and you don't delegate tasks that needs to be delegated to the right person, therefore freeing yourself to focus on the strategy. That is the purpose of delegating.
Very well said. And so in my previous episode, I talked about, how empathetic leaders, really need to be attuned to, those on their team, getting to
Mhm,
know them beyond the surface, because when you do that, that will allow a leader to understand what are those, other talents that
mhm.
a team member brings, to a particular project or mission. You don't know that if you just view somebody as a cog in a wheel and you only know them for what they were brought on to do,
Yeah.
because so many people have, that we have this thing in project management called the T, meaning that you can do these things and you can do these things, you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
sometimes what you need somebody to do is not necessarily what they were hired for. You need them to do another skill set that they have, and you only know that by talking to somebody and getting to know that person,
Yep.
you know.
So true.
And that was just something that I always enjoyed doing. Like I loved looking at, people's profiles or, their resumes as a PM. Like, oh my goodness, you did XYZ. Okay, okay. How can we use that here? I wanna, take what you did there and put that into this project too. Let you work your magic. You still gotta do that thing we hired you for. But when you get some time, weave that in too, because that was bomb, you
Yeah,
know? So
absolutely.
getting back to I had a little digression
No, no,
moment.
no. You were perfectly fine. No, no, that was very good, well said.
Thank you. So, what about leaders who struggle with delegation? What do you suggest?
Well, I was one of those leaders that struggled
Oh,
with
bring it,
delegation.
bring it.
Again,
Tell
it
on
had my
yourself.
name on it. So
Okay,
if it had my name on it, it was my brand.
that was
And
your
my
ball
brand was never going to fail. I don't care
ball
what it
hog.
was. And so leaders who struggle with, delegating, they have control issues. Some may be narcissistic, but that's not sustainable.
Right.
I had to encourage myself to start small. I had to delegate one responsibility at a time, and then I had to observe the outcome and, and supervise it to ensure that things were getting done to the standard that I required all of my team members to maintain. And I had to use it as a learning experience because trust goes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
I have to trust you, you have to trust me. And then trust is like a muscle.
Mm-hmm.
Once you trust them in one aspect of it, then you build that trust to another aspect or another element or another factor. And with that, trust grows with practice. And so does it, that also goes to the team capacity to handle challenges and to be autonomous.
Mm-hmm. Very, very well said. Delegation, like you said for yourself, that was something that you struggled with. Um, I probably, earlier on in my career may have, but I realized as I went on, it's like people say, oh, you have a doctorate. And I tell you, for me, the biggest thing about having a doctorate is that I realize how much I still don't know. You know,
Hmm.
and so that really makes it easy for you to delegate because you're like, you know what? You got this, go ahead. Because I appreciate the fact that
Yes,
people are smarter than me. You know what I mean?
absolutely.
I don't know
Absolutely.
everything, nor do I want to. So so, Dr. Sanders, let's move on to discussing regulating emotions. What techniques can leaders use to remain composed and empathetic under pressure?
Ah, I'm going to give you, there's several, but I'll give you three techniques that leaders can use to maintain emotional balance. Some people have heard the term mindfulness. And when we
Mhm.
say mindfulness, it's taking a few minutes, excuse me, a few moments to kind of focus on your breath, on your breathing, and observe your thoughts without
Mhm.
judgment. And like I said earlier, hit the reset button. Be
Mhm.
mindful of the situation that you're in and the person that you're talking to, because everybody is not the same. You have to handle just like your children. Your children are different. You
Mhm.
can't handle one child the same way you handle another child. Just
Mhm.
like an employee, every employee has a certain skill set.
Yep.
You can't allow yourself to really uh, create a baseline that each employee will operate at this particular level. And so you just have to be mindful of the people you are in communication with. Then taking a deep breath, even just a few slow breaths, taking a deep breath, it can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digestive state. Reduces stress level. Sometimes when I'm doing my teaching with leaders within the facilities, I tell them one of the things when you're about to engage in a stressful conversation is always have a bottle of water with you. Because if they're about to say something and they're about to say something that is unnerving, just put the bottle to your mouth, drink some water,
Mhm.
gives you a few minutes to take a break, to kind of pause, and then let them continue. Because you want to be able to hear them and you don't want to react to what they're saying. So take that bottle of water and just drink a little bit, kind of digest what they're saying, and then put it down. And then be prepared to address it appropriately. Another way to do it is reframing challenges, shifting your mindset to have a different point of view, because in a crisis, an opportunity can grow rather than creating a catastrophe, reacting without listening. Too many times we have a response to whatever it is that the person is saying instead of listening to try to hear to be understood. And so,
Mhm.
for example, when instead of thinking, oh my God, this is a disaster, you might reframe it as, okay, this is an opportunity to demonstrate resilience and creativity. And what I've observed, especially with professional athletes, they have determined that a new terminology, instead of losing a game or losing a possession in football or basketball, is not about the loss. It's really about learning from the
Mhm.
loss.
Mhm.
And when you do that, you're learning, why is that person saying this? let me understand what they're saying, and it will help you to perform better or respond better the next time.
Mm-hmm. There's this book, I probably gonna butcher the title. I want to say it was written by John Maxwell. I have to look at my
Oh
Kindle
yeah,
app.
if it's about leadership, John Maxwell.
So I think it's titled Sometimes You Win, Sometimes You Learn.
Yes, yes,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yes,
Yeah, that's really good. And
yes,
it talks about, like you said, reframing, the task at hand, view it as an opportunity versus as a bad thing. And that's so important, not just in a professional sense or in a sports sense, but even in life, for your own
yes,
development,
yeah.
reframing a crisis as an opportunity. So Dr. Sanders, those are incredibly actionable strategies. Is there one that you think leaders often underestimate?
Yes. I think, well, mindfulness is often overlooked
Mm-hmm.
because it seems simple, yet is
Mm-hmm.
incredibly effective. Even a quick 1 minute mindfulness practice can provide leaders with the mental clarity needed to respond with empathy and composure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. That's fantastic. So to summarize, leaders can maintain composure and empathy during a crisis by pausing to assess the situation, communicating with understanding, and delegating tasks
Yeah,
to a trusted team. And then they can also regulate their emotions by using techniques such as mindfulness and reframing that crisis to see the positive in it. So thank you, Dr. Sanders, for these valuable insights.
you're
Thank you
so
so much.
welcome. It's my pleasure. These
Awesome.
strategies might require practice, but they're invaluable tools for navigating the toughest challenges while staying connected to your team.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just thinking about another class idea. I think I told you I have this learning management system. So I'm like, because I learned mindfulness, several years ago. But when I did learn it, I had never heard of it. So I'm sure that
Mhm.
there are other people out here who are, equally unaware of, what it is and its benefits. But anyway, we discussed how empathy impacts leadership during crisis and explored strategies for staying composed and empathetic under pressure. So now let's turn our focus to something truly empowering, which is developing empathy as a skill. So, Dr. Sanders, many people think of empathy as something you either have or don't have, but it's a skill, isn't it?
Yes, it is. You're absolutely
Okay.
right, Dr. Fun. While
Okay.
some people may have a natural inclination towards empathy, it's a skill that anyone can develop with intentionality and
Mm-hmm.
practice. Empathy isn't just about being kind, it's about understanding others, tuning into their emotions and using their understanding to guide internally your actions. The
Mm-hmm.
good news is that structured techniques and exercises can help leaders at any level build this critical skill.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's start by talking about one of the most practical techniques. You know,
Yes.
we talk about it all the time, active listening. So what makes active listening a powerful tool, for developing empathy? I think sometimes active listening can be used, overused, I should say. But, what makes active listening a powerful tool? What is it?
The thing about active listening, we abandon it so quickly in frustrating situations.
Mm-hmm.
We can be so 0 to 100 when things are not going in the manner that we would want it to go. And so active listening is the foundation of empathy because it requires us to focus entirely on the person in front of us. As I stated earlier, you have to listen for understanding. And
Mm-hmm.
if you don't listen for understanding, too often leaders listen just enough to respond. Because as soon as someone speaks, you're already thinking what you want to say. And so many times we're going to cut that person off. I know when I'm speaking with my wife, I asked her to help me guard my mouth from interrupting, interjecting, because I have a thought in my head and I'm trying to make sure I get that thought out. But I'm not listening to what she is saying because I'm preparing to respond. But active listening involves listening to understand. A great exercise is reflective listening. After someone shares something with you, reflect on what you've heard. And not to kind of repeat it as you're a parrot, but to show you're truly processing their words. For example, you might say, so what I'm hearing is that you feel overwhelmed, you're tired, you need some assistance, the workload is too much. Is that right? Help me to understand a little bit more about what your struggles are. And so these small steps can transform how people feel as though they have been heard and feel valued.
And it's all about, I was laughing on the inside because like what you said is awesome and it's so spot on, but it's also within the spirit of which you say it too. So it's not like, when you were doing reflective listening, you're saying, oh, okay, so you telling me that you feel overworked, overused, right? Is that what you just said? It's the way you say it, to let the person know that, what they're saying is valued.
Absolutely.
So Dr. Sanders, I believe reflective listening is especially helpful during one-on-ones with
Yes,
teams. Are there additional ways that leaders can practice active listening?
absolutely. Precisely one approach is to set aside a few minutes during meetings for open dialogue, keeping
Mhm,
what we call in the military the open door policy and
mhm,
asking open-ended questions, especially
mhm,
like how instead of what. How
mhm,
does everyone feel about this direction?
mhm.
Instead of the closed-end question, this is what we are going to do. You've just closed any type of response from your team because you've told them exactly what we're going to do. And then actively listening without interrupting. Again, one of my problems that I'm trying to correct.
You gotta
And
drink water.
I know. And what I've asked her to do is to kind of be my accountability partner, to make sure when she's having a conversation with me and I am not interrupting her, to tell me, okay, you did good listening, but again, you didn't respond correctly to the question that I asked. So I want to be made accountable for making sure that I lead myself in the right direction. So I don't do that in public when I'm communicating with people within my nonprofit or at a school or with my mentees. So the way active listening by interrupting is so important is simply a way is simply showing the person that you care and
Mhm,
you can gather insights that you might have missed when you just listen.
mhm. That's good. So let's move to the next technique then, perspective taking. What does it mean for leaders to walk in someone else's shoes? We hear that so much.
Yes, perspective talking is the ability to put yourself in someone else's position. And that can be challenging. You have to imagine their thoughts. And it's hard to understand the working knowledge of a person's brain, not knowing what a person is feeling or communicating. But the team that you have throughout a project or an employee that you have, you can tell that something is wrong
Mhm,
when you see them, pull back. They're not engaged. They are being, uh, isolating themselves. That is when you, as a leader, have to be able to say, there is something wrong here. And so it is one of the most effective ways to build empathy because it shifts your focus from your own point of view to theirs. For an
mhm,
example, if a team member is resistant to a new process, consider what they're experiencing instead of labeling them as difficult.
mhm.
Are you feeling uncertain? Because again, body language is important. When you're kind of giving instructions on something, people sometimes have that curious, face on them. And you can go, okay, it seems as if you don't understand. So
You're in
you
the
have to
headlight.
be, so you have to kind of, always remember your audience. That's
Mhm.
the most important thing.
Yeah.
They taught us that in the military.
Mhm.
Always
Right.
understand your audience.
Yep.
And if they feel uncertain or have a question, you have to address that. And then sometimes you have to change their workload in order for them to be successful. Asking them questions allows you to approach the situation with greater understanding.
So very well said. So how can leaders develop perspective taking skills, to
Yeah.
feel, how it is to walk in somebody else's shoes? How do we get there?
Well, we can look at it in two ways. One of the ways we can look at it is called empathy mapping, writing down what you believe someone is thinking, feeling, and
Mm-hmm.
experience in a specific situation. This helps leaders to consciously consider different dimensions of a person's perspective. So when you're empathy mapping, as you're writing down either their response or their reaction. You're being mindful of how you're interpreting the body language of that person. And then you can kind of do a role reversal during team discussion. Ask leaders to take on someone else's perspective in the room and explain how that person might view the situation. It's a great way to build empathy within the entire team. And it was extremely beneficial for me when I was an enlisted soldier and then I transitioned to an officer because I understood what soldiers were going through. Had a
Mm-hmm.
soldier who was dealing with his weight, and he had failed his PT test on several occasions. But at the third failure, I was supposed to process him out of the military. But instead of processing him out of the military, I placed myself in his shoes and I started working with him in his PT test. And I sustained him for the duration of my command. And he passed his PT test. He made the next rank of E5. And so it allowed him to see that there was someone willing to sacrifice and to work with him in order to believe in him and understand or understood that he had potential, which he believed he didn't.
That's excellent. I remember those days. You know, the days where he's like, "Oh, I got to do PT twice a day. I got to go run my soldier." So Dr. Sanders, those are excellent suggestions. Let's shift and talk about emotional intelligence workshops.
Mm.
How do these programs help leaders develop empathy? And emotional intelligence became like the buzzword or so, like over the
It still
years.
is.
Mm-hmm.
It is. Emotional intelligence, or EQ, is like the cornerstone of effective leadership. There are workshops on emotional intelligence, typically focus on four key areas: self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, and relationship management. And so when we look at empathy as a core aspect of social awareness, these workshop teaches leaders to identify and respond to emotions of others in real time. They also provide tools for managing their emotions. It is so hard at times in crisis situations to manage your emotions. So when it is critical, it is important that we take that deep breath, we drink that bottled water, we pause and assess so that way we don't react or overreact. We don't strike while the iron is hot. We strike while the iron is calm. So that way we're able to address the situation in a more intelligent manner. So many programs include interactive elements, factors such as discussions, case studies, scenarios, vignettes, and role playing. It helps participants to practice empathetic behavior in a safe environment.
Okay. So those workshops basically offer you tools for practicing how to develop your empathy. But can you provide a specific example of a program or activity that stands out for you
Yeah.
when they have seen?
One effective activity I observe is the emotional wheel exercise. Leaders receive a list of emotions
Hmm.
and are asked to identify what they or their team members might feel in different scenarios. This then helps them to expand their emotional vocabulary and become more attuned to subtle cues in conversation. So, say for an example, the employee or the member of the team has the emotional wheel of sad. And so you're walking around within a group and you have to identify what that particular employee is experiencing. And you're just listing off, but you don't know exactly what the emotion is. And
Hmm.
so as you go through these different areas, it allows leaders to go, okay, obviously I'm not in tune, I have to pay more attention. So that's really a great exercise, the emotional wheel exercise.
Emotional wheel. Okay. So finally, let's discuss crisis simulations. They sound like a powerful way to practice empathy under pressure.
Yeah. When you think about crisis simulation, it places leaders in realistic, high pressure scenarios where they must make decisions while considering the emotional and practical needs of their team. For instance, a simulation may involve a hypothetical product failure or a
Mhm.
PR crisis. Leaders are tasked with addressing the issue while maintaining team morale and customers' trust. These exercises are valuable because they highlight the tension between urgency and empathy, providing a safe space to practice balancing both.
Mhm. Okay. So how can organizations integrate these simulations into their training programs? And this is always interesting to me because, I feel like in the military, you get all this, either through combat and through some really
Yeah.
seriously realistic training through, training exercises, mock-ups, just all of that stuff.
Yes.
So how can organizations integrate these simulations into training programs, as civilians?
Yeah. Oh, good Good question. And they can start small by
Hmm.
creating role play scenarios during team meetings or leadership retreats. They're very effective doing leadership retreats. It's like one of those icebreakers to kind of break down the actual understanding of why we are here and then
Hmm.
begin the building block of bringing the team together. So larger organization may invest in external consults. Again, these consultants, they specialize in these crisis simulations. And either way, the key to focus is helping leaders make better decisions, choosing the best course of action where these decisions are communicated effectively and efficiently, and the emotion is toned where it brings about a more cohesive group.
Hmm. Thank you for taking us through those techniques, which included active listening, perspective taking, emotional intelligence workshops, and crisis simulations. So from those, it's very clear that empathy is a skill that leaders can develop with intentional effort.
Well, it's my pleasure, Dr. Brown. These techniques enhance empathy, create stronger, more resilient teams. The more we practice, the
Hmm.
more natural it becomes. It becomes a habit. Again, as I spoke
Hmm.
earlier, it is like a muscle. As
Hmm.
we become more attuned and more aware, it will lead both with firmness and with understanding.
Awesome. Awesome. So that was so good. But now, Dr. Sanders, let's shift to real world examples and highlight some leaders who manage crises effectively before we, begin to transition because we're almost like running out of time already. So
I'm sorry. I've been
I
talking.
know, but this is good. This is good. I always, deal with this when I have a guest because the conversation and interaction is always so good. So, Dr. Sanders, can you provide some examples of leaders who have handled crisis with empathy and firmness?
Yes, I would have to say my hero. General Colin Powell. I met him at an AUSA convention. He is the
Wow.
first African American chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and U.S. Secretary of State. General Powell was known for his empathetic approach to leadership. He was a leader's leader. And during
Hmm.
the Gulf War, General Powell emphasized clear and compassionate communication with his military teams and the public. And that also goes for General Austin. I also met him during the
Hmm.
Iraq War, and he was um, our GA at Fort Stewart, and he was the one who designed our attack into Iraq. And so he was also an empathetic and compassionate leader. So General Powell always was aware of service members' personal sacrifices. He worked hard to ensure that every decision reflected respect for their humanity. His ability to listen was so genuine for the people that he led, and it made him one of the most respected leaders in the U.S. military.
Yes, it did. And you know what? Those are great examples that you mentioned. And you know, not to delve into politics, but I know you read the news. I would say those gentlemen, the General Colin Powell and General Austin have set that bar super duper high for the Department of
Absolutely.
Defense. And it'll be interesting to see, you know, next. So I'll just leave it
Yeah,
there. I'll just leave it there. So
drink you some water.
right, drink some water. Drink some water, exactly. So Dr. Sanders, we're gonna have to get ready to transition to closing. So goodness, we didn't even get to really talk about the training programs, but this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna wrap it up with three takeaways. So for our audience. So to wrap up, three things, there are three takeaways that Dr. Sanders and I want you to take away from all of this that we've been talking about. Start practicing mindfulness or emotional regulation techniques. Even just a few minutes of deep breathing or reflection can help you lead with greater clarity and empathy. This week, hold one empathetic conversation with a team member and make the time to listen and show you care. You know, that'll make all the difference. And then explore training programs or resources on emotional intelligence and leadership development. If you need one, Antero Solutions has it. My shameless plug. So
Go for
investing
it.
in your leadership growth is one of the best ways to foster empathy in your organization and then to continue to grow as a leader.
Well said, Dr. Vaughn. These steps may seem small, but they can transform how you lead and how your team experiences your leadership.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Sanders. Thank you for your insights today. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for this episode of Empathy and Enforcement, Balancing Firmness with Understanding. Remember that empathy isn't just a skill, it's a mindset. The more you practice it, the more stronger and more connected your leadership will become. Like Dr. Sanders says, it's a muscle. So if you found today's discussion valuable, share it with a colleague and stay tuned for the next episode. Until then, keep leading with heart and purpose. So, Dr. Sanders, again, thank you for joining us today and sharing your incredible insights. Empathy in high stress situations isn't just a tool, it's a mindset that defines great leadership. To our listeners, I challenge you to consider how you can lead more empathetically, even under pressure. If you enjoyed this episode again, please share it. Don't forget to tune in to our next episode where we'll explore even more strategies for balancing empathy and enforcement.
Thank you, Dr. Vaughn. It has been always a pleasure. Remember, empathy is not a weakness, it's a leader's greatest strength.
Right. It'll never be a weakness if you work that muscle, right? It's a
That's
muscle.
right. Get strong.
Awesome. So, one last little thing I want to leave our audience. Please look for a link to a free course in Antero Academy titled Feedback and Discipline with Empathy. That course link will be on the Antero Solutions webpage. That's ENTERO solutions.com. This course is free for a limited time and provides focused insights into one of the most nuanced aspects of leadership, and that's delivering critical feedback and enforcing standards while maintaining a sense of care and fairness. The course's subtopics include the psychology of feedback, empathy and accountability, and practical techniques for empathetic feedback. So I look forward to you joining that course and giving me feedback on what you thought about it, what can be approved or, sustained. And check out some of the other courses, it may be scant, but check out some of the other courses on the platform as well as our catalog will be growing. So again, thank you for joining us on this episode of Empathy and Enforcement, Balancing Firmness with Understanding. It's been an honor to explore the power of empathy and leadership with you. And I hope today's discussion has inspired you to lead with both strength and heart. Remember, leadership isn't just about making decisions, it's about making a difference. Empathy allows us to connect, inspire, and create a lasting impact in the lives of those we lead. So again, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and share. And share it with somebody who will find it valuable or who needs this. Let's continue building a community of leaders who lead with compassion and purpose. Thank you to my producer, Ms. Jessica Henderson, for keeping us on target. Please tune in for the next series on Thursday, January the 2nd, 2025 at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That series is titled The Voice of Virtue, Communicating Ethics in a Cynical World. That'll be really, really good. That episode is titled Establishing Credibility in Ethical Communication. So in this episode, we'll discuss how leaders can establish and strengthen their credibility in this area while maintaining credibility when communicating ethics and integrity and conveying authentic ethical leadership. So until next time, I'm Dr. Vaughn, reminding you to lead boldly, listen deeply, and always uphold the standards that make you an exceptional leader. Take care, and we will see you in the next episode. Thank you again, Dr. Sanders.
You're so very welcome, Dr. Vaughn.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You have been listening to Leading by Example, upholding standards without compromise. I am your host, Dr. Vaughn, bringing you inspiring excellence, one lesson at a time. Tune in to Transformation Talk Radio every first and third Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific for fun, practical, and educational stories as I share lessons, both the good and the bad, that I have learned in my 20 years of leadership and management experience. As we go through and learn these lessons, I would ask you to be thinking about those lessons that you bring that you could share for potential, hey, you may even want to be a guest on our show. So think about those lessons as we continue to explore inspiring excellence, one lesson at a time. For more information, please visit www.ontarosolutions.com. That's